Prologue: The Village of Ashes. The village was a place forgotten by maps, a scatter of crooked houses with roofs stitched from straw, a single market square where dust rose higher than coin, and fields that yielded just enough to keep its people alive. At night, the air tasted of smoke and wood ash, and the silence pressed against the windows like a waiting predator. It was here that Elira lived, though few spoke her name aloud. To the villagers, she was simply the orphan, as if that single word could erase the fact that she had once been a daughter, once been loved. Her parents had died in a fire no one explained, a fire that devoured their home but spared her. Since then, whispers followed her everywhere she went. Some pitied her, most feared her. Children crossed the street when she passed. Old women muttered prayers when her shadow touched their doorsteps. They believed misfortune clung to her, as if death had chosen her once and might choose again. But Elira's eyes told another story. They were not the eyes of a victim. They burned with hunger. Hunger for more than the small cage of this village, more than a life of tending fields and sweeping hearths. She wanted towers of stone, libraries filled with secrets, a chance to prove she was more than a curse whispered about over mugs of ale. The chance came on a morning that began like any other. The sky was pale, the earth damp with mist, and the crows fought over scraps in the square. A knock came at her door. On the threshold lay a letter, sealed in crimson wax and stamped with the crest of a serpent coiled around flame. Her breath caught as she broke it open. The Royal University of Orphan invited her to join their ranks. Her hands trembled. She had never seen parchments so fine, nor words so heavy with promise. That night, while the village drank and gossiped, Elira packed her satchel. A cloak frayed at the edges, a half loaf of bread, a locket with her mother's faded portrait. Nothing more. She did not say goodbye. She owed this place no farewell. When dawn broke, she walked the road out of the village. The mist swallowed her figure, and the villagers said she would never return. They were right. The girl who left that morning would never return, for she would be changed. By fire, by love, and by storm. Chapter 1: The City of Stone and Flame. The capital of Orphan rose from the earth like a dream made solid. Towers spiraled upward, capped in gold that caught the sun and flung it back into the heavens. The air itself seemed alive, thrumming with merchants shouting, wheels clattering on cobblestone, and the mingled voices of 1,000 tongues. Elira stood at the city gates, clutching her satchel as if it were a shield. She had imagined the capital in her dreams, but no imagining had prepared her for this. It was too big, too loud, too dazzling. Every step into its streets felt like stepping into another world. The Royal University lay at the heart of the city, its gates tall as castles, carved with runes that shimmered faintly in the light. When she crossed them, the noise of the city faded, replaced by the hush of knowledge. Marble steps stretched before her, arched halls echoed with the footsteps of scholars. Statues of past masters gazed down with cold, eternal eyes. But awe quickly soured into unease. The students around her were draped in velvet and silk. Their voices carried accents of nobility. Jewels gleamed on their fingers, and when their eyes found her patched cloak and worn shoes, their mouths curled in disdain. Whispers followed her just as they had in the village. Who let that in? She smells of smoke. A scholarship rat, no doubt. Elira kept her chin high, though every word stung like a lash. She had endured whispers all her life. She would endure these too. Lectures began the next morning. She sat in cavernous halls beneath chandeliers heavy with crystals. Professors in robes embroidered with gold spoke of history, of magic, of kingdoms long gone. Their words flowed like rivers, and Elira struggled to catch even drops. She scribbled until her hand ached, her candle burning low long after the others had retired. Nights blurred into dawns. She slept little, ate less, and studied until her eyes burned. The others thought her weak. She would prove them wrong. Still, the city overwhelmed her. The markets smelled of spice and smoke. The river that cut through the city carried boats with sails bright as banners. Everywhere she turned, there was more to see, more to learn, more to fear. And it was in the midst of this chaos that she first saw him. He was sitting beneath a column in the university courtyard, a book open on his knee, though he was not reading. His dark hair caught the light, and his eyes, when they lifted to meet hers, were the color of storms gathering on the horizon. He smiled, faint and sharp, as if he knew a secret she did not. And for reasons she could not name, Elira's heart faltered.
Chapter 2. Sparks in the Courtyard. The courtyard was always busy at noon, filled with students chasing the fleeting warmth of the sun. Pages fluttered in the breeze, voices rose in 100 debates, and laughter rang from groups gathered beneath the carved arches. Aliera usually kept to the edges, her satchel heavy with books, her eyes fixed on cobblestones rather than faces. But today, she paused. The boy from the column was there again, the storm-eyed one. He leaned against the marble as though it belonged to him, a book half open in his hands. Not reading, not truly, just letting his eyes drift lazily across the page while his attention seemed fixed everywhere else. His posture was ease itself, but there was something about him that radiated danger, as though he were a blade wrapped in silk. She meant to walk past. She told herself to keep her head down, to avoid the trap of noble arrogance, but as she passed, his voice caught her like a hook. "You're staring." The words slid from him without effort, smooth as water, sharp as glass. Heat flared in her cheeks. "I wasn't." He tilted his head, storm-gray eyes locking onto hers. "Then you're imagining me, which is worse." The retort was quick, unbidden. "Or perhaps you're imagining my staring, which says more about you than me." For a heartbeat, silence stretched between them. Then, to her surprise, he laughed, not cruelly, not mockingly, but with a sound like thunder breaking into rain. "What's your name, orphan girl?" he asked, closing the book with a snap. The title cut sharper than a knife. She stiffened. "Aliera." "Aliera," he repeated, tasting the syllables as if they were wine. "I'm Kaylin. Remember it. You'll hear it often." She frowned. "Is that a threat?" "A promise," he said, smiling with the kind of arrogance that only someone who had never been refused could carry. From that day on, he seemed to appear everywhere she went. In the library, sprawled across a chair 2 tables away, pretending to study while his eyes flicked toward her every few moments. In the lecture halls, 1 row behind, his voice lazy when professors asked questions, yet always correct. In the gardens, leaning against trees, as if the world itself bent to his comfort. At first, she ignored him. She burying herself in scrolls, her nights filled with ink stains and candle smoke, but Kaylin was relentless, a storm cloud that refused to drift away. One evening, she found him in the library, occupying her usual corner. His books were untouched, but he had stolen her candlelight all the same. "You're in my seat," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. He looked up, slowly, deliberately, a grin curling his lips. "I didn't see your name on it." "Move." "Or what?" Something inside her, something that had been smothered by years of whispers and pity, snapped. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Or I'll prove I belong here more than you ever will." The grin faded. For the first time, she saw it, the flicker of surprise in his eyes, the storm unsettled. Then, slowly, he leaned back, lifting his hands in mock surrender. "Very well, scholar. The seat is yours. But be warned, Aliera, storms don't scatter so easily." When he was gone, she sat trembling, not from fear, but from something far more dangerous. For the first time in her life, someone had seen her, truly seen her, and she wasn't sure if it thrilled or terrified her.
Chapter 3. Flames in the Garden. The university garden was a world apart from the marble halls and echoing lecture rooms. By day, it hummed with students seeking quiet. By night, it became something else entirely. Lanterns floated above the pathways like captured stars, their light casting silver shadows across rose bushes and carved fountains. Alera discovered it one evening after a lecture left her head pounding with dates and laws she could not remember. She wandered without purpose until she stumbled upon the garden, its gates half open as though inviting her in. She had thought it empty until she heard his voice. "You study too much." Her heart jolted. Kalen was leaning against the fountain's edge, his reflection rippling in the water. His storm-gray eyes caught the lantern light, turning them into twin embers. "You study too little," she shot back. He smirked. "I learn in other ways." She rolled her eyes and turned to leave, but he rose swiftly, stepping into her path. He was close enough now that she could smell the faint trace of smoke and leather clinging to his cloak. "You've been avoiding me," he said softly. "Maybe I enjoy the silence." "Liar." His voice was a whisper, but it rang through her like a strike of lightning. For a moment, the world seemed to narrow, the rustle of leaves fading, the lanterns dimming, until there was only Kalen, standing too close, smiling, that dangerous smile. She should have walked away. Every instinct told her he was trouble. Arrogant, secretive, a storm wrapped in skin. But something deeper, something reckless kept her rooted. Instead, she asked, "Why do you follow me?" "Because you burn brighter than the rest of them," he said simply. "And I like fire." Her breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not as an outcast, not as a ghost, but as something dangerous, alive, worth chasing. From that night on, the garden became theirs. They studied together by lantern light, though Kalen's books often lay untouched as he teased her about the way her brow furrowed when she read. They argued endlessly about history, about strategy, about the fate of kingdoms long gone. Sometimes their voices rose loud enough to startle birds from the hedges. Other times, their words dissolved into silence, broken only by the sound of hearts beating too quickly. One evening, rain swept through the city, drumming against the glass towers. The garden was nearly deserted, its pathways slick with water. Alera found Kalen waiting by the fountain, his cloak soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead. "You're mad," she said, pulling her own cloak tighter. "Perhaps," he replied, eyes glinting. "But so are you for coming." He reached for her hand, and though she should have pulled away, she didn't. His fingers were warm despite the rain. At that moment, the storm outside seemed to echo the storm within. Their lips met under the falling rain, fierce and trembling, a collision of fire and water. It was not gentle nor sweet, it was desperate, as though both of them had been waiting too long for the spark to ignite. When they pulled apart, Alira's chest ached with something she couldn't name. This was not safety, this was not peace, this was fire. Beautiful, consuming, and certain to leave scars. And though she did not yet know it, every kiss carried the weight of secrets, every touch foreshadowed the fracture that would come. For love, like storms, is never meant to be tamed. Chapter 4. Shadows in the Cellar. Autumn came to Erethan cloaked in mist. The city's golden towers grew pale under a sky heavy with rain, and the leaves that once burned crimson fell and dissolved into mud. Elira's world, however, had never felt brighter. Every stolen glance with Kaelin, every secret meeting in the lantern-lit gardens, every argument that dissolved into laughter. It was as though the lonely years of her life had finally cracked open, letting sunlight pour through. But light always casts shadows. Whispers began to follow Kaelin. Students spoke of him in hushed tones, the professors too. Rumors of late-night disappearances, of meetings with people who wore no university crest. Once, Elira overheard a scholar mutter his name alongside the word traitor. She confronted him once, gently. "They say you go where you shouldn't," she murmured in the garden, her fingers tracing the damp stone of the fountain. His smile was quick, practiced. "People say many things. Do you believe them?" She wanted to say no. She wanted to believe in the fire that burned between them, in the man who looked at her as though she were the only star in a dark sky. But doubt is a seed, and once planted, it grows. Days passed, his disappearances grew longer, his laughter dimmed, and Elira, restless and afraid, made a choice. She followed him. One night, under the veil of fog, she trailed Kaelin through the city's winding streets. He moved swiftly, confident, as though he had walked these paths 1,000 times. The lamps grew sparser, the cobblestones slicker, until the alleys swallowed him whole. He stopped before an unmarked cellar door. With a glance over his shoulder, one that almost caught her, he slipped inside. Elira's heart hammered as she crept closer, pressing her ear against the wood. Voices murmured within, low and urgent. Carefully, she pushed the door open a crack. The cellar was lit by a circle of candles, their flames dancing against stone walls. Figures stood cloaked and hooded, faces hidden in shadow. And at the center was Kaelin, his voice steady, commanding. "They do not see it. The crown feeds them lies, but the storm is rising. We will finish what was begun." Elira's breath caught. The words were not just rebellion, they were war. Her parents' death surged back into her mind, the unanswered questions, the silence the village had wrapped around her tragedy, and suddenly it fit. The fire that had consumed them was no accident. It was connected to this, to Kaelin. She stumbled back, her hand clamped over her mouth to stop a cry from escaping. The door creaked. His head turned. For an instant their eyes met across the shadows. The storm in his gaze was not of passion, but of dread. Later, when she confronted him, her voice trembled with rage and heartbreak. "You lied to me." Kaelin stood in the garden where they had first kissed, rain dripping from his cloak and his hands open as if to show he carried no weapons. "I protected you. By dragging me into a lie? By letting me love someone who betrayed everything I believed? I didn't want this for you. If you knew the truth, they would have killed you. I kept you safe." Her tears tasted of iron. "You kept me blind." The silence that followed was unbearable. The garden around them, once their sanctuary, felt like a tomb. When she turned and walked away, the rain fell harder, drowning out the sound of his voice calling her name. Love had been fire. Now it was ash.
Chapter 5. When the Sky Burned. Winter had barely settled its frost over Erethan when the city began to tremble. It started as murmurs in the taverns, notes passed in secret, professors silencing their lectures when questions grew too bold. But Aliera felt it in her bones. The tension was no longer whispers. It was a scream waiting to break. She avoided Cadellan. Weeks had passed since the garden, since betrayal shattered her chest like glass. He still lingered at the edges of her vision, storm eyes heavy with words he never dared to speak. But she had no room left for him. All she had now was survival. The night the rebellion erupted, the city sky lit with fire. It began with a roar, not of men, but of dragons. Their wings tore the clouds apart. Their bellies cast rivers of flame upon the streets. The air was filled with smoke and screams as towers cracked under their fury. The Royal University, once a sanctuary of knowledge, became a fortress under siege. Students scrambled, professors shouting orders that dissolved into chaos. Marble walls shook as explosions rattled through the city below. Aliella ran through corridors she had once memorized, her satchel banging against her hip, her lungs burning with smoke. The world she had dreamed of, fought for, was collapsing in a single night of fire. Through the haze, she saw Cadellan. Sword drawn, cloak shredded, he cut through soldiers and rebels alike with the desperation of a man fighting not for victory, but for survival. Their eyes met across the chaos. His lips shaped her name, but the clash of steel drowned his voice. She turned away. But fate did not let her flee. A blast tore open the east wing, sending shards of stone tumbling. She was thrown to the ground, her hands scraping against broken marble. When she looked up, a shadow loomed over her. A rebel, face hidden, blade raised. Her body froze. The strike was inevitable. Then came the storm. Lightning cracked through the roof, a bolt splitting the floor between her and the blade. The rebel staggered back. And in that split second, Aliera felt it. A surge of power coursing through her veins, raw and unbidden, as though the storm itself had chosen her as its vessel. The rebel fled. She stared at her trembling hands, sparks still crackling faintly across her fingertips. Breathless, terrified, she understood. This was no accident. This was her legacy. Her parents had not died for nothing. They had been part of this, guardians of something older than crown or rebellion. And now that burden had passed to her. The realization struck like thunder. She was no longer just an orphan, no longer just a girl desperate to belong. She was a weapon, and weapons are meant to be used. Chapter 6. The Legacy of Fire and Storm. The city of Erethin burned. From the shattered walls of the university, Alara watched dragons wheel across the smoke-choked sky, their wings blotting out the stars. Below, soldiers clashed with rebels in streets slick with blood. Bells tolled from broken towers, each strike lost to the roar of fire. And in her chest, the storm raged. It crackled through her veins, every heartbeat a drum of thunder. Sparks leapt from her fingertips, arcs of lightning splitting the night whenever her fear slipped its leash. She had never asked for this curse, this gift, but the city demanded it now. A voice cut through the chaos. "Elira!" Kalen. He stumbled from the smoke, cloak torn, blade dripping. His face was marked with ash and grief, his storm-gray eyes locked on her. For the first time, there was no arrogance in them, no smirk, no mask, only desperation. "You have to trust me," he said, breath ragged. She flinched as another blast shook the walls. "Trust? You lied to me, Kalen. Everything about you was a lie." "He lied to keep you alive. He stepped closer, hand outstretched, though he dared not touch her. The rebellion wants your bloodline. The crown wants it chained. But you can end this. You are the storm they fear. Her heart hammered. The storm inside her surged at his words, lightning flashing across the rubble. "And if I refuse," she whispered, "then the city falls," he said simply, "and everyone with it." A dragon's shadow swept across them, its roar shaking the ground. Alara closed her eyes, the weight of choice pressing like stone upon her shoulders. She could run, as she had always had, or she could stand, claim the legacy her parents had died for, and let the storm consume her. When she opened her eyes, they blazed with lightning. "Then let it end," she said. Together they climbed the ruined tower, wind tearing at their cloaks, smoke searing their lungs. The dragon descended, its mouth opening in a river of fire. Alara raised her hands. The storm answered. Lightning burst from her body, a torrent of raw power that split the night in two. It struck the dragon head on, shattering its fire into sparks, hurling the beast back into the clouds. The city trembled beneath her roar. But power comes with a price. The magic tore through her, burning veins and bone, threatening to unravel her from within. Kalen caught her as she staggered, his arms strong around her trembling body. "Don't stop," he pleaded. "You can save them." Through the storm's agony, she met his eyes. For all his lies, for all his betrayals, there was truth in that moment. He loved her. Broken, flawed, but real. And so she gave everything. Lightning poured from her, storm and fire clashing across the skies. Dragons screamed, rebels fell to their knees, the crowned soldiers fled. And when the storm finally cleared, silence fell upon Orphan. The rebellion was broken, the city still stood. But in Kalen's arms, Alara was motionless. Her body, fragile against the weight of the storm, had given more than it could bear. For a heartbeat, he thought she was gone. But then her eyes fluttered open, dim but alive, sparks still faintly glowing in their depths. "You're still here," she whispered. "Always," he said, though his voice cracked. The storm had ended, but its scars would never fade. In the days that followed, Orphan rebuilt. Stories spread of the orphan girl who became a storm, who faced dragons and fire and did not fall. Her name was whispered in taverns, sung by children in streets, carried on the wind like a promise. Alara no longer belonged to shadows, nor to whispers. She was fire. She was storm. She was her own destiny. And though love had broken her, it had also forged her. The world would never forget her name again.